I'm old bull. I don't speak from theory, I speak from scars. I've buried brothers, raised a family, worked with my hands till they bled, and stood face to face with failure more times than I can count. I've lived the weight most men try to avoid. And now I share what life taught me the hard way. This ain't a place for polished speeches or pretty quotes. It's where real men come to hear the truth raw, lived and earned. If you're tired of noise and ready for depth, welcome to the trail. There's a dangerous trend creeping through this modern world, a belief that thinking about life is the same as living it. That sitting in a coffee shop with a fancy notebook and clever thoughts somehow makes you wise. But I've never met a tree that grew from an idea, only from action, effort, and roots sunk deep in the dirt. A man can spend his whole life reading about the wilderness and still die without ever smelling pine or tasting mountain air. And that's the problem. Too many men today are full of thoughts and empty on deeds. They admire strength from afar, quote warriors they've never stood beside, and preach about pain they've never endured. But wisdom isn't found in recycled quotes. It's forged in solitude, in scars, in carrying weight that almost breaks you. You don't need more information. You need transformation. And that only comes when you stand up and live what others only write about. So if you've ever wondered why you feel stuck, even though you've read the books, watched the videos, listened to the podcasts, maybe it's because your soul is starving for something real, for truth with blisters, for fire that burns clean. In this video, I'm not handing you thoughts. I'm handing you life, raw and unfiltered. And if you're ready to stop thinking and start becoming, then saddle up. Because this ride's not for spectators. I've come to learn that a man's words only carry as far as the road he's walked. You can feel it when you read something, written by a man who's lived through storms, both in the world and in his soul. There's a quiet strength behind those sentences, like a scar beneath a flannel sleeve. I've read pages that felt like campfire conversations, not because they were poetic, but because they were real. The truth of a good man's words isn't in their elegance, it's in the grit between the lines. Reading, for me, has always been more than just absorbing information. It's like sharpening a blade on a whetstone that's seen blood. But that whetstone better be real. If I'm going to read about war, it better be from a man who heard the whistle of bullets, not from someone who read about it in a library. If I'm reading about manhood, don't give me words from a soft-handed theorist. I want words from a man who's held his brother while he bled. Real manhood isn't passed through grammar. It's passed through scars and reflection. So when I pick up a book, I ask myself, who is this man behind the ink? Has he ever smelled the forest after the rain? Has he buried a friend? Has he built something with his hands? Because those things change the way a man writes. They burn through the nonsense and leave only the truth behind. If the man hasn't fought his own demons by the firelight, then maybe his words aren't worth my time. And you'll find when you start reading with that question in mind, most words in the world grow quiet real quick. I've met men who could quote philosophers all day long, but couldn't split firewood if their life depended on it. They sit behind desks, weaving words about hardship while their hands stay soft and clean. There's a kind of hollowness in that a voice without echo. You see, intellect might impress in conversation, but it doesn't build legacy. A real man knows that knowledge without application is just air in a balloon pretty until it pops. I remember talking to a young man once sharp as a blade, but dull in his spirit. He knew the theories of every thinker from Socrates to Nietzsche, yet he trembled at the thought of making a tough decision. He could explain discipline, but couldn't practice it. He spoke of strength, but never faced his own fear. That's when it hit me. Intellect is like a saddle. It means nothing if you never climb the horse. A cowboy with no dust on his boots has no business preaching about the trail. If you want to become a man others can trust, you have to live what you talk about. And that means stepping into the fire, not just reading about it. Climb a mountain. Lose something that matters. Make a promise and keep it, even when it hurts. Those moments change how you speak, how you think, how you write. Because once you've walked through the valley, your words don't echo, they resonate. And when they resonate, they can light a fire in another man's chest. I don't waste my time reading men who only write. I read men who bled, men who lost their footing and got back up anyway. The kind who wrote with dirty hands, not manicured fingers. Because real wisdom doesn't sit in silence. It grows where pain and purpose collide. When a man writes after walking through the wilderness, you can feel the trail dust between the lines. Think about someone like Jack London. That man didn't imagine the cold, he froze in it. He didn't fantasize the fight for survival, he lived it. His words carry weight because they were paid for in hardship. Same goes for C.S. Lewis, who lost his mother young, fought in war, faced grief head-on, and then he wrote about pain, love, and faith. That's what I call earned wisdom. That's what turns a book into a fire that burns quietly inside your chest. So before you soak in another man's words, ask yourself, did he earn the right to say them? Has he held the hand of someone dying? Has he stood under the weight of his own failure? If not, maybe those words are just polished stones with no soul behind them. But when you find a man who lived before he wrote, keep him close. Because that kind of man doesn't offer you ideas, he offers you a map. There's a dangerous thing that happens when a man spends too much time thinking, and not enough time doing. His thoughts begin to rot, not in smell, but in strength. They sound clever, sure, but they collapse under the weight of real life. I've seen men build entire belief systems out of second-hand ideas, then fall apart the moment life hit back. Because thought without action is like a rifle with no bullets. Might look tough, but it won't protect you in the wild. Back when I was younger, I read a book on leadership full of charts, frameworks, and theories. Sounded good on paper. Then I tried using those ideas to lead a crew of tired, hungry men working 16-hour days in the rain. Didn't take long to realize that theory alone doesn't hold a team together. Character does. When your boots are soaked and your body's running on nothing but grit, Abstract principles don't matter. What matters is trust, timing, and the tone in your voice when everything's falling apart. A strong man knows that knowledge must be field-tested before it becomes wisdom. You want to understand patience? Don't just read Seneca Try Raising a Child with a Fever at 2 a.m. Want to learn discipline? Don't quote Jocko Go, Run a Mile when your knees hurt and your pride's already bruised. You can't build a legacy on borrowed thoughts. Sooner or later, life will ask you to prove what you believe. And if your answers only come from books, not from bruises, you'll be exposed. I've always believed a man earns his voice the same way he earns his scars through fire. There's a difference between someone who's read about storms and someone who's weathered them from a tent with a busted zipper. A man who's stood in court facing loss or buried a friend with dirt under his nails speaks from a place books can't reach. That voice is grounded. It doesn't float above pain. It walks through it with steady boots. Some years back, I sat with an older man who'd spent decades working ranches and burying brothers. He didn't speak much, but when he did, every word felt like it carried the weight of 20 winters. He never claimed to be wise, he just told stories. And in those stories, I heard more truth than I ever got from polished speeches or fancy sermons. The men who can guide you aren't the ones standing behind podiums. They're the ones who kept walking when their soul begged them to sit down. So if someone's going to teach you how to live, how to suffer, how to love, and how to rise again, they better have done all four. They'd better know what it means to be broke, lost, tired, and still keep going. Because only then do their words become medicine. Only then does their advice carry weight. We don't need more preachers in perfect suits. We need more weathered fathers, broken husbands, old cowboys with smoke in their lungs and truth in their eyes. I've met men with titles long as a horse trail CEO, PhD, Reverend Doctor whatever. But the only title I've ever respected is the kind carved into a man's spine by what he's done, not what he says. You want to know who a man is? Don't listen to his words, watch his hands. Watch how he treats the waitress. Watch if he shows up when it's inconvenient. Character isn't spoken. It's proven when no one's clapping. I once worked a job clearing brush through snake country with a man who never finished school, didn't have a title, didn't need one. The way he carried himself steady, responsible, always the first to rise and the last to eat, that taught me more about integrity than any book I've ever read. You see, he didn't need a resume. His axe was sharp. His word was gold. And when it came time to lead, every man followed him, not because he told them to, but because they trusted him. That's the kind of man I aim to be. The kind who doesn't chase applause, but earns respect with calloused hands and a quiet walk. The kind who builds a name not on talk, but on timber hauled, wounds healed, and promises kept. Words are cheap in this world. Real men build their legacy one firewood stack at a time, and the world remembers those who did the work more than those who gave the speech. I've shaken hands with men whose palms felt like old saddle leather rough, solid, real. And in that moment, I knew more about them than any framed degree could ever tell. Those calluses were earned stacking hay in July, fixing fences in the rain, holding the line when no one else would. They don't come from reading about life. They come from living it hard, honest, and head-on. A diploma hangs on a wall. A callus carries a story. Once, at a town meeting, a well-educated fellow stood up and gave a speech about how to improve the rural economy. Fancy words, clean suit, soft voice. Then old Jack, retired farmer, part-time mechanic, full-time straight shooter, stood up and calmly explained how his family survived 3 droughts without ever taking a handout. No script, no PowerPoint, just truth, plain and powerful. The room listened to Jack, not because he had credentials, but because he had scars that matched his words. You see, a man's hands don't lie. They'll tell you if he's carried weight, fixed what was broken, or just lived behind a screen. A good man might never write a book or earn a degree, but if his hands have built homes, raised kids, planted seeds, he's someone I'll listen to. So before you trust a voice, look at the hands behind it. That's where you'll find truth. And sometimes those hands say more in silence than 1,000 polished arguments ever could. The best books I've ever read didn't come from comfort. They came from the battlefield of a man's life. You can tell when a page was written with trembling hands after a long night of doubt, or from a tent soaked in failure. Those stories stick because they're forged in heat, not imagined in safety. When a man bleeds onto the page, his words carry weight. They cut through the noise like a knife, through dry leather. Take. The old man and the sea, Hemingway, didn't invent that struggle. He lived his own. The salt of that story feels real because it came from someone who understood loss, aging, quiet pain, and the stubborn fire to keep going. That kind of writing doesn't come from theory. It comes from getting knocked down, standing back up, and daring to speak after. No real man writes from the mountaintop without first crawling through the valley. If you're looking for wisdom, don't chase bestsellers, chase bloodstains. Look for the writer who failed publicly, who worked 3 jobs, who lost someone, and kept going. A man who's been tired, broken, and still wrote anyway. That's a man you can learn from. And when you find a book like that, don't just read it, study it. Highlight the scars between the sentences, because behind every word, there's a soul that earned the right to say it. Not every man who writes deserves your attention. Some string words together like beads on a necklace, pretty, polished, and utterly empty. Before I take in a man's thoughts, I ask myself, what did it cost him to say this? Did he live it? Did he pay in sleepless nights, sweat, sacrifice, or is he just echoing someone else's echo? Words carry different weight depending on the hands that laid them down. I remember reading a book on resilience once. The author talked about loss, grief, grit. But a few pages in, I could tell he hadn't lost anything real. No dirt under the nails, no death in the family, no demons faced at 3 a.m. with a whiskey bottle and a Bible. His resilience read more like a checklist. Now contrast that with Viktor Frankl, who wrote from the belly of a concentration camp. His words are heavy because they were hammered out in fire dot. So before you let a book shape your beliefs, look past the cover. Find the man behind the ink. Has he suffered? Has he led? Has he loved deeply and failed publicly? That's the kind of man who can speak to your soul. If not, you're better off tossing his book on the firewood pile. Because a real man doesn't just crave knowledge. He respects the weight of where it came from. And when that weight's real, it anchors you in a world full of wind dot. The world's full of men with big ideas, plans, visions, theories that could change everything. But most of them never lift a finger to make it real. I've sat across tables from smooth talkers who could inspire a room but couldn't patch a roof or hold a family together. Talk's easy. Ideas float, but a deed? That leaves footprints. It leaves something that'll outlast the man himself. Real man, one with purpose in his chest and firewood on his back, knows that legacy isn't built in the mind. It's built in motion. It's hauling water for your neighbor when his well runs dry. It's showing up to fix what's broken instead of writing about how broken things are. It's holding your child's hand through a storm and still having the strength to light the fire when you get home. Deeds, not dreams, are what shape the earth beneath our boots dot. So when the day ends, don't ask yourself what you thought about. Ask what you did. Did you stand firm? Did you speak truth? Did you carry someone else's burden for a mile? That's where masculinity lives. That's where legacy grows. And when your story's told one day, let it not be of the man who meant well, but the man who moved. Because in the end, it's not the thinker the forest remembers. It's the one who planted the damn trees now. Ask yourself, how much of what you know was truly lived? How many of your beliefs were earned, not borrowed? Maybe it's time to stop admiring the fire and start walking into it. The truth is, this world doesn't need more clever minds. It needs more courageous hearts. Men who aren't afraid to sweat, bleed, and get back up again and again. So what are you going to do after this video ends? Will you just think deeper thoughts, or will you take the first step toward becoming a man of action? Will your story be one of theory or transformation? You already carry the weight. Now it's time to let it shape you. Stand firm. Push forward. Leave something worth telling. If this message stirred something in you, don't walk away from it. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. Because around here, we don't just talk about manhood, we live it. And this journey we're on, it's just getting started.